So, continuing on, we're in the spiritual section where Jesus starts out this section by saying, don't practice your righteousness in front of other people to be seen by them, or you're going to get nothing from me. Wow, those are words I should pay attention to, right? Well, how do I not do that? Well, it helps to know what it means to practice righteousness. Righteousness is just being the way God intended you to be, and practicing it means just living it out, doing it, being there, being that person in a meaningful, soulful way. And yet, so what does that look like? Well, Jesus gave us a whole new way of looking at the world and dealing with the world in the previous verses, where he says, "You heard it said, but I tell you. You've heard it said, I tell you." It puts a lot of things and all of our cultural things, a lot of laws, kind of on their head, and gives us a new way to think and do. And so beginning with that, but we move into this, but he focuses even more. He says, but you know what? The core of being righteous, the core of practicing righteousness, doesn't have to do with that, and it doesn't have to do with religious practice. That is not the core of what it means to follow me and what it means to follow God. What is then? Well, he lays it out. He gives three religious practices: giving to the poor, giving to the poor, praying, and fasting. Good things, you should do them. But then he contrasts them. He says, the hypocrites, which just means actor. And it's kind of fun to replace that with actor, someone who's putting on a show. And like an actor who's putting on a show, they're doing it for the attention that they get from other people. That's their motivation for all those things. They're doing it for attention. And the problem is not that they're doing it in public. The problem is that they're doing it, their focus is the audience that is around them, not the audience they're talking and apparently supposed to be doing it to and for. And so we can do this in a couple ways. On the one hand, we can be overt like the Pharisees, where they strategically put themselves in places to be seen, where they shouted trumpets and called attention to things. But we can be subtle too. A really good example is in prayer. How many of us are too self-conscious, too worried about what others think, to pray out loud in a group setting? Well, it's the same thing. We're calling attention to ourselves more than we are, and we're worried about the audience around us rather than we are worried about the audience we're talking to. And so, and we see even more of this idea of this relationship with God focus as he talks about prayer, because he goes into more. He says, don't be like the hypocrites, but also don't be like the Gentiles. See, in prayer, as we're talking in a relationship, these Gentiles, what they did is they just kept talking, and they repeated themselves again and again and again and again, and their hope was to manipulate their God or gods into doing what they wanted them to do. He says, don't be like that. Instead, pray this way, and he gives us what we know as the Lord's Prayer. And again, the point is not that you repeat this prayer many, many times over and over again, in that some way God's going to just say, okay, fine, I'll do what you want me to. But rather, it's a large piece of it is just show us what praying looks like. It's a recognition, one, of who God is, that he is ultimate and awesome, and you need to take time in prayer to recognize that. You need to take time to trust him and recognize that he's able and willing, that he will give us our daily bread, that he will give us what we need, to recognize God's will in that his kingdom would come, that his will would be done on earth and in our lives as it is in heaven, and that we would be honest with what those needs are, with what's going on in our lives. And then lastly, we also need, it has to be in the view of the gospel and a view of forgiveness. The idea that we are forgiven and we can confess to him, the reality that others are forgiveness, because a relationship with God and a relationship with others are intimately connected, as we'll see in the next section. And so at the end of this, we come to this idea that is God your reward? Is your relationship with him the motivation behind your religious practices? Is it the motivation behind what you're pursuing, your practicing of righteousness? Is your relationship with God based on truth and based on honesty, based on trust, based on worship, and based on the gospel and forgiveness? If it's not, I'd love to talk to you. But we're going to continue on.